Hi. The topic that we chose to do our research on, the issue is human trafficking. My name is Emma Johnson, and the first topic we will be discussing is just background information. The definition that DHS.gov states for human trafficking is, according to DHS.gov, human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. It can also happen to any person, no matter their age, race, gender, or ethnicity. According to globalemancipation.ngo, the main types of human trafficking are labor trafficking, sex trafficking, and also other different forms of trafficking. In labor trafficking, there are currently 24.9 million victims, and sex trafficking has 4.8 million victims, and the other forms of trafficking have 19.5 million victims. The other forms of sex trafficking can include anything from forced marriages to even selling of different human organs. Now, another important topic that needs to be talked about is the signs to look for. Every person can help by looking for the signs if they know them. For doctors, when people come in for appointments, these are some specific signs that they can look for in their patient. If a patient comes in with someone else, this is what to look for. If the patient does not speak for themselves, this can be a sign of human trafficking. If they are not allowed privacy by the individual who brought them in, that can also be a sign of trafficking. Also, look for signs of malnourishment and physical injuries that could indicate abuse or forced labor. If the patient avoids eye contact with you, that may also be a sign of human trafficking. As a physician, if they notice these signs, they should tell the person who brought them in that they must leave for privacy issues, but be nice so they don't know what you're doing. And say that they will be allowed back in right away so they feel okay with them leaving them there with you alone. When they leave, the physician will be able to speak to the patient alone and will be able to see if they are in danger or if they need help. They can also contact the police if they're almost 100% sure that they could be in sex trafficking or labor trafficking, because even if you're wrong, it's better to be safe than sorry. There are also different signs that people can look for in others, like if you see people in public or just around the street or like people that you work with. If you notice strange tattoos on the neck or lower back area or a branding mark, that can be a sign of human trafficking. If you see a young child working at a private restaurant, they could be in labor trafficking. If they seem to have scripted responses to your questions during social interactions, they may be in danger. If you notice someone's house has items that could keep people in, like barbed wire fences or extremely tall fences or unnecessary amount of locks on their doors, then you should report it to the police immediately. The next topic I will be talking about are the myths and misconceptions of human trafficking. The most common myth is that sex trafficking is the most common and only form. This is the main form of trafficking that people usually think about when they hear the words human trafficking. This is actually false, and it has the lowest number of victims. Although it still has many victims that are affected every year, labor trafficking actually has the most amount of victims. Many people also tend to think that it cannot happen in the United States because we are a very modern and not a third world country. That is also untrue. It can happen in every single country. Some people believe that every victim will seek help when they are in public. That is untrue. It can happen to anyone, and they may be too scared to come forward. Some human traffickers will even make their victims find more victims to take in for them. The last misconception is that victims are from foreign countries and people of low social class. Although those people may be affected, this is a myth. Victims can come from any socioeconomic group or nationality. Human trafficking does not only just target a certain group of people. Everyone can be affected every year, and everybody is affected every year. All forms of human trafficking take place all around the world. Each country varies in the forms of human trafficking and the methods that they use. Here are some of the countries and the different forms of human trafficking that they have. In Brazil, religious cults target people to get members, and then they force them into slave labor, and they cannot escape. The lack of jobs in Cambodia leads young women on the search for jobs, and then sex traffickers take them in and exploit them. Ethiopia has gotten parents to send their children out of rural areas and into urban areas to work in factories. These kids will now be forced into labor trafficking and not be paid for it, and their parents won't know what's going on. In the United Kingdom, gangs get young British children to carry drugs for them. This is a form of labor trafficking. In the United States, human traffickers prey on children in the foster care system mostly, and then they sell them into sex trafficking. In Yemen, they force children as young as 11 years old to be soldiers in their army.
So with human trafficking within the United States, there's not really any good estimates or numbers for that, since most of them are typically widespread and for the international purposes, so we don't really have any good estimates for victims of human trafficking in the United States, so those aren't really there, but we have some estimates of youth that are considered to be at risk, so that's about 24,000, 35,000, no, 240,000, 350,000, sorry, youth that are considered to be at risk, but those numbers aren't really exactly like reliable, since it doesn't give us any of the adults or people who are actually like within human trafficking. So those don't really help us out a whole lot with this issue. So another problem with the human trafficking in the United States is that it's very under-recognized. So that's a big issue that we have here. And then how it's changed over time is that it's really just modern day slavery, so that also can be like a really big issue. Since slavery is considered to be gone by most of the general public, but it's really not. It's still around here in the form of human trafficking. It's pretty crazy. So it sucks. And most of most public believes it's gone. It's a big problem. And the topic's often just pushed aside and ignored, so it's again really under-recognized and not talked about a whole lot, so that can be a really, really big issue. It's going to probably continue to be a big issue, because even though slavery was abolished by the 13th Amendment, it's still going to continue to be around for a long time through human trafficking, because we're not really taking any steps to get rid of it, so that can be a really big problem. And people targeted today there's really no one safer. Like, all racial and ethnic groups are targeted by human traffickers. It's quite crazy. Although people from politically unstable or people who are economically vulnerable are generally more likely to be targeted and become victims of this. So, and then there's other situations that can be considered to be vulnerable, but it's typically those who are economically or emotionally vulnerable are most likely. Children and adolescents are also at some pretty high risk, but especially for sex trafficking. So, and then women are at higher risk than men, of which most people would probably guess. They make up about 91% of sex trafficking cases, and then another 57% of just labor trafficking cases. Whereas in the United States, those are some estimates they have, but again, they're not completely reliable, which can be a big issue, but we can get through it. So human traffickers have a lot of different methods that they use to catch people, which can be which is a problem. So a frequent method that a trafficker could use is if they're especially if they're a young male, they could try to like romanticize, well, not quite romanticize, but um they use romance and seduction on their target to form a romantic relationship with them. So and then, but it's not really a real relationship. They're in it just to capture them and sell them off or something like that. So that's a issue. When they um build this relationship, they romanticize them at first, and then they quickly turns into like the traffickers blackmailing the victim and to compliance and intimidating them, threatening them. Basically, they also can often cut the victim off from all their like family and friends. Sometimes even moving them to a different, like convincing them to move to a different country through like painting pictures of them traveling the world and countries romantically and having the time of their lives. But really, it's just a big farce to trick the victim into doing what they want, the trafficker wants. Another method traffickers use is job advertisements. This is especially happens often in countries that where the economic and financial form of the country is not the best. So they use false job advertisements to lure victims in, sometimes luring them to different countries even. But in the fronts of these job advertisements are often very believable, surprisingly. They try to use like actual companies and they put the supposed job ads in real newspapers or TV advertisements, stuff like that. So sometimes they're quite difficult to figure out how to deal with them. But once this victim actually like shows up, like once they're captured or seized or however their traffickers are going to go about that, traffickers usually try to break the victim, so they torture them emotionally and physically and spiritually, any sort of abuse they can to break their spirit to get them to comply. So it's often through rape and torture and forcing them to take drugs and alcohol. It's a lot of and threats even too, like threatening to hurt their family and hurt them, just hurting them emotionally and breaking their spirit, trying to force them to do what they want to do. It's quite interesting why they would do that.
So, continuing on with what Zach was saying with some of the methods that they use to coerce new victims into the human trafficking ring. Fraud and deception is a main one, and that includes many tactics. That could include religion, a promise of a better life, and abuse of power. So they use religion as a way of coercion by, say, bringing in a psychological bond and making the slaves believe that if they were to disobey, that something bad will happen to their family or to them due to a higher power because that's their belief. Um, the promise of a better life, that captors will promise them literally that they could have a better life. They find people with bad home lives who have nothing to lose. They have money issues, they have nowhere to go. Some of them have already been introduced into um, the human trafficking ring, and they think that if they can get these people, then these people will get new people. An abuse of power, well, that could mean any number of things, really. A teacher, a mentor, a mother, father, a trusted family member, any close relative who grooms you specifically for the sole purpose that one day you'll be involved and introduced into the human trafficking ring. Unfortunately, family members do this. And it may be because of drugs. They got to come up with how to get their next drug session. Money. They need the extra money, and they, for some reason, can't figure out any other way to get the money. Blackmail. They know somebody who will threaten them to where they don't have another option, they think. Abduction. They could literally get taken without warning, against one's will, forcibly. Kind of like in the movie Taken. I know that's a pretty famous movie. That actually is one of the lesser ways that human traffickers are involved. That's because it is harder, because there's more of a way to show, or more of a way that the captives will thrash about and try to get away, and it just brings so much more attention that it's easier to get them to be groomed first, trusted. Another way is by having the former slaves that are already involved in it, such as the ones who have Stockholm syndrome, where they believe that their captors are have their best interests for them. They believe that this is the way that it's supposed to be, so they get others to join. Like, they could have started out any number of ways. These people could have got abducted. They could have been promised a better life. Their religion could have brought them there. Romance or false job advertisement, kind of like Zach was saying. But regardless of how they got there, they truly believe that their new life, being held captive, is the greatest thing that could have happened to them. And as a result, they recruit other people to join them. They introduce their new captives to their previous captors, and they seem charming and friendly and just all around like a nice person. So they keep coming around until they have fallen in too deep to get back out. That's when they realize that they're in a human trafficking ring, and either they don't like it and want to escape, but they can't, or they do like it and they recruit other people, and it turns out just to be a vicious cycle. Baby factories are another thing too, where women are held for the sole purpose of having children. They are brought there, again, on any number of the deceit and deception. Maybe they were told that they could have a good life, they could get the best child care or whatever, when in fact they don't get any child care, prenatal help. They're just stuck and just waiting to give birth. Let's kind of look more into the political side here, and show how the human trafficking ring kind of ties into politics. In the headlines a little while ago, Jeffrey Epstein, he was major in the headlines. He was a financial donor to many political parties, so many politicians benefited from the money he made. Money that was made using human trafficking. He pled guilty to felony sexual solicitation charges. He had a little black book with many people's names involved. A lot of politicians, allegedly, Trump and Clinton, some that I remember hearing. Don't know exactly how they were involved. But again, he did donate to a lot of their campaigns, so it just shows how um, how the politics are involved with that. It's the human trafficking is like a backbone to some of the politicians and how they benefit and how they receive their donations, unfortunately. Um, Paul D. Peterson, he was a Maricopa County assessor, and he was charged in a human trafficking adoption scheme. Kind of like one of the baby factories. He had women crowded in homes waiting to give birth. He may promise them false promises, saying, hey, if you come here, we can give you a good life. When in fact, most of them were just there waiting to give birth, to be shipped back wherever they came from. He benefited, made a lot of money off of the adoptions from these children. That was a few years long that went on too. At the Thai Malaysia border, there was an army general, Manis Kongpan. Investigators found there were people holding migrants hostage in jungle camps until their relatives could pay for their ransom. There were 60 people, including a lot of trusted local politicians, that were charged in that. Charges such as human trafficking. They actually had murder, holding people for ransom, using firearms, unlawful use of firearms or weapons. And that was, he was convicted for, they were, Manis Kongpan, he was convicted for trafficking and organized transnational crime. He was the Bangkok Army General. Religion, again, we can look a little more into that too. There are polygamous cults that play a large part in sex trafficking as well. Members of these groups have been known to run off with their own children in preparation of selling them off to be married. There are churches that force members to work multiple jobs and then they take their wages. There was a Pennsylvania, that happened in Pennsylvania, there was a ministry. He pocketed their wages. There were some involved in that, using sex and labor, some trafficking cases there. And again, they use people, they get people in who are unsuspecting, they don't realize it, by saying that God has a plan for your life, and reading the Bible to coerce people into compliance. Again, he says, something, there's a higher power, and if you disobey, then who knows what could happen if you're disobeying him. Just some of the ways, still. There was a couple running a religious school, and using the young boys as labor workers. This happened in Alabama. There was a private boarding school where parents could send their troubled children, teens, and it was Christian education that they would be getting. So people would send their children to this place, in hopes of helping to get them on the straight and narrow. Unfortunately, they did not teach Christian education there. Instead, they used them as workers, labor workers, in their business. There are people, females, who will, pose as like religious church girls, trying to lure others to join them. So again, another part of deception. But religion is still being used as part of how to get these girls involved. It's not always with here's a better way to make your life, or a way to make your life better, but saying something as simple as, hey, do you want to come and join my study group, my Bible study group? And they get these unsuspecting girls who see other females their age, don't think that would happen, so they go with them and end up being taken that way, and sold off into the human trafficking ring for sex or labor or whatever it is that they need them for. So overall, human trafficking is basically modern day slavery. Force, fraud, or coercion is used to make individuals perform work against their will. There are approximately 600,000 to 800,000, if not more, trafficked across international borders annually, and many more even stay in their own countries. So that's not even close to the number of the human traffickers we have in the world today, or victims of human trafficking. It causes psychological damage, isolation from friends and family, little to no education, dependency on their captors, and distrust in law enforcement. It's something that there are a lot of people trying to go against. A lot of, acts and bills have been passed to help push to end human trafficking, and hopefully one day we can stop this.